Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dancing with Damage. I'm Ian, your resident philosopher.
And I'm Abby, your resident author.
And today, we talk about social service and welfare as a concept. Hey, Abby.
Indeed. We think that we can improve upon this concept to not only rein in some of the budgetary spending that might not be ideal, but also to make sure that the people receiving these benefits are actually receiving a benefit.
Very true. If you're following along in the social blueprint, trademark, not sure if it's trademark, I think it is, then that is chapter 31. For this act, which is Act 3, which is what we label necessary lifestyle changes, we're going to try and always tie it back to those pillars at play to sort of justify our rationale within that chapter. And we can start the chapter a bit with the story. You really like this fable, so I'm happy to say it again out
Mm.
loud as it was written down in chapter 31. But the story at the start of chapter 31 is a family of hares,
Yeah.
of rabbits.
Yeah.
And so the mother hare goes off to do whatever it is mother hares generally done their day doing. And one of the younger brothers, one of the younger leverets, says to his older brother, an older leveret, I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. I'm a young, hungry leveret. And so the older brother hops off into the woods and comes back with a poisonous toadstool. Oh dear. And provides it to his younger brother. And just before the younger brother is about to nibble it down, the mother bursts back into the warren
Mm.
where all rabbits live, I think, and remonstrates the older leveret, saying, how could you try and feed your brother such a poisonous thing? You know, it would have satiated his hunger, but he would have been in big trouble had he eaten it. And we sort of use that as an example of how monetary social service welfare payments have, in our view, become in Canada and in similar models around the world.
Yes. So, one concept of damage that we've tried to really help reiterate is that damage is not your fault. It is something that happens to you that you can over time improve upon. But when you are suffering from or dealing with damage, you are essentially not in control of yourself. There are elements that you don't have control over. And not always. Occasionally, there are people who, fall in hard times or their life circumstance have changed. We're not talking about those individuals. Specifically, there are people often addicted to substances who rely heavily on the welfare system. And those individuals are not in a place to make the best decisions for themselves. They just simply are not. It's not their fault. But often they'll say to, especially to Ian, where he works with many of them, I need help. I want to change my life. But the supports aren't in place to actually meaningfully allow for that to happen.
So, you know, if you look at why social services like welfare came around, I'm sure initially it was quite a very positive system because the reason for being on welfare would have been, I guess you could say, the right one or the one that was envisioned when welfare was created. And by welfare, we mean that some people who aren't able to work or work very much are receive a paycheck or a check essentially from the state, usually once a month.
Mhm.
And in Canada, it can be to the tune of 900 or above dollars. And there are certain ways to amplify that paycheck. But it's not an insignificant sum of money. But the issue is, it's like the poison mushroom in that our life experience, and particularly mine, when I look at the criminal justice system, for example, is that for a damaged population and demographic, which unfortunately the vulnerable population is typically very damaged, power, the power of money is actually not a helpful thing. And we say that in one of the pillars of play, Abby, right? Which is one of them is what?
Any power that's taken away should be replaced with a better reward.
Definitely. So the way we envision it in the social blueprint is to say providing finances for no return of service is an inherently negative thing. We justify that by looking at the weave of love and understanding that to be fundamentally happy, a person has to be an adult in the substantive years of their life from 25 to 75 roughly, And that means sacrificing and giving time and energy to repay the community that supported them as a child and will support them again in their second childhood, seniority. And so the idea of allowing a population to remain non-working through the years of 25 to 75 is like the leveret who gets the poison mushroom, and it's actually a poisoned gift, that money without return of service. Hey, Abby.
Yes. So as humans, as we mentioned in an earlier episode, if you're not working to your capacity, if you are not doing as much as you are capable of doing, you will feel sadness. You will never be able to experience true happiness because part of you knows that you are not accomplishing the most. So, as we've previously established, those who have limitations, if they are working within those limitations, they're as happy as clams, because they understand their ability and they are working to that ability. But when you, and just to take it back to substances again, unfortunately, there are in our experience many individuals who are in a cycle that's rather vicious, involving interactions with the justice system and then interactions with substances. And usually the catalyst between being released from an interaction with the justice system to re-entering the justice system is some form of monetary compensation through something like welfare. And instead of following their plan to make themselves better and use the supports given to them for free, the power of money changes that. And the call of the substance, the addiction, is so strong, it overrides all of the parts of their body that are trying to improve their lives. So I think our argument, in one way, is that if you replaced money with the items people need to flourish, it makes it that much harder. It's sort of like, if I can use a bit of a metaphor,
Yes,
I
please.
know me. So, something people have been talking about a lot in the news is resistance. And some scientists are saying that part of the reason shopping addiction and people going into crippling debt is on the rise, one of the reasons that is happening is because there's no longer friction between the point of wanting something and the moment of obtaining something. You have automatic payments. So before, you used to, 30 years ago, you used to have physical cash and you used to have to look at that money and feel the weight of how much that was worth, physically hand it over in exchange for a good or service. And you had to physically take time out of your day, use some method of transportation, bus, train, car, walking, bicycle, to go to the store to get that item. And then you had to transport it back to your home. So you had to have a lot of steps between you wanting the thing and you purchasing the thing. Nowadays, we have Apple Pay on our phones. A lot of websites like Amazon save your information, so it's one click pay. And on Amazon, they just released a feature. I don't know if it's in Canada yet, but it's in the States, where you can just keep adding things to an order. Let's say you place an order for shoes and you want something else. They don't even ask you to go back to the checkout. You just click add to order and it automatically charges your card. So there's no friction. There's no time where you have to wait to get the item. You don't have to plan going to any location to get it. You don't have to wait for hours of operation. You don't have to physically take out your card and punch in a pin. You don't have to see the money. And you don't even have to go to pick it up. It can be delivered to your house. So all of these elements of friction in society help us to take a second and really consider, do I want this thing? So if you have elements of friction between somebody who is suffering from an addiction and obtaining more of that addictive substance, if there's more friction between point A and point B, it actually gives them more opportunities to succeed this time in maybe not getting to point B.
You could think of it a bit like a person standing next to a cobra.
Are you upping my metaphor with your metaphor? Are we at a metaphor?
Metaphoreception.
Okay, cobra.
So let's imagine a person standing next to a cobra. Person doesn't want to get bit. So what might they do? They might draw in their arms and legs and sort of try and be as far away from the cobra as possible to make it as difficult as possible for the cobra to bite them.
Mhm.
But when we, as you'd say, remove a lot of that distance between ourselves and a problematic item or problematic policy or anything problematic, It's sort of like holding your hand out to the cobra, saying, here, it's even easier to get me now. I'm even closer to your face, almost inviting that venom. Remember that damage comes from, it is a sword in the hand of guilt. So in the subconscious, we talked about the 6 true emotions: guilt, grief, love, hate, rage, joy. All evolved subconscious emotion that have allowed humans and other gregarious mammals to coexist in packs without tearing each other apart, basically. And so guilt, the idea of self-sabotaging and feeling atonement for a perceived immoral or antisocial behavior, is, as we call it in the social blueprint, it's like the daggers are going in, self-sabotage. And so damage is the sword in the hand of guilt. And then part of the subconscious, which is still trying to fire on an instinctive level to bring positive benefit to the user and the rest of the community, is like love. And so whenever you, as Abby says, remove resistance, that's like giving a bigger sword to damage or to guilt, a bigger weapon of damage, and then shrinking the shield of love or shrinking the weapon of love. So it's even more uneven contest. We have to remember too that in a society, you can really measure how well it's doing by looking at the most vulnerable population. The whole point of a society is not to protect the strong. In fact, animals that don't exist in societies, it's already the strongest are the winners. If you looked at sharks or
Cougar.
any kind of animal that doesn't exist in a pack, the strongest is going to have the best quality of life. It's unique to societies and communities of gregarious pack animals where the potentially physically weaker or more vulnerable individuals can still have a meaningful quality of life and not just be wiped out. In fact, one thing that paleontologists observed about humanity is there was a moment where paleontologists, or I guess it'd be anthropologists, specifically if they studied humans, would find graves of people whose bones were knit.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
And the significance, of course, being
That they performed surgery. So if someone was injured, they didn't just leave them to suffer or allow them to perish. They worked to make sure that person could heal and then again be reintroduced to society as a functional person.
yeah, probably not too much on the surgery end of things, but definitely kept the person alive. Because here's, I mean, they could have done surgery, like flint knife surgery. You can imagine that would have.
Okay, so maybe not surgery, but you know, they put a brace on their leg and bound it for them, you
Could you
know.
imagine caveman surgery? That would be okay. Here's the anesthesia rock.
That's pretty good.
All right, Thog.
Thog.
Count backwards from 10. I don't know how. Bomb.
They make a TV show.
And they're like, okay, a scalpel. That's just a slug. All right, let's do this. So, I mean, they're trying. Yeah, the idea being in a non-pack or a non-super evolved gregarious animal, if an animal breaks its bone, it's never going to heal because before it's going to heal, a predator is going to come eat the chickadee or the frog or whoever broke its poor foot, right? That thing is never healing. That's a death sentence. But the idea that a community could take care of that vulnerable individual and allow the bone to heal so the person didn't die of that injury, that is the whole moment in history, in evolution, where humans sort of became what we are. And that's why we argue that the purpose of a human given to us by evolution is to sacrifice the most for the next generation and the community around us, because literally that's what makes us human, is that moment when the bone healed, protecting that vulnerable sector. So that's the measure of society. So when Abby and I talk about sort of pulling back on monetary welfare payments, I hope you don't take it the wrong way. We see it as an important way to protect that vulnerable sector who might rely on welfare, understanding that damage is the cause of that behavior 9 times out of 10. There's other explanations for it too, but generally it's damage. And so what we propose instead are work centers. And Abby, why don't you give us a little hypothetical. What would be a work center?
I want to take a step back and sort of
Not too far. There's a fireplace. Then we'll
no,
have to get the
it
caveman surgeon on site.
it
Count backwards from twig.
leaf. It's work centers in accompaniment with the modified welfare system. So just to be really clear about how we envision it, let's pretend for a second there's sort of two realms of people who participate in welfare. There are people who are down on their luck, who are trying to turn things around actively, and it's circumstance that have caused them to be in a position where they need help. And then there's people who are usually battling with their inner demons. Their damage is very strong, and something is inhibiting them from being able to participate fully in life. Usually, it presents itself as substance addiction, but it could be a lot of. So, if you change welfare to instead of giving people money, you give them things they need. So, for people who are down on their luck, if you say, here, you know what, we're giving you a place to live rent free. You don't have to worry if the money coming in every month is enough to cover your rent. You're just going to get a place to live. And also, we're going to give you food. You're going to have access to food and you don't have to worry about paying for that. And also, if you need clothing, here, you get clothing. If you need it, you can have access to it. The things in your life that you actually need, you have access to. To me, that's a better deal because, as we'll talk about in 1 second about work centers, you have the option to make money still, but then all of that money is pure profit. So you can really use that to turn your life around because a lot of people who are in the welfare system have to fill out forms every month and they have to really worry about where every dollar is going and they still have to budget. And they often have to, access things like food banks and worry that the food bank has enough food. And eventually in an episode, we're going to talk about how to revolutionize that a little bit. But I think that if it were me and I was in a situation where I had a change in circumstance, I would appreciate being given food, clothing, and shelter and just say, hey, all you have to worry about now is fixing the problem and getting yourself back on your feet. The necessities of life are taken care of for you. That's a great deal. And for people who are struggling with addiction, not giving them the power of money immediately without any friction or resistance. All of a sudden, people who are struggling, who might have used the money from the government to pay for substances as opposed to rent, as opposed to food, as opposed to electricity, as opposed to clothing, all of a sudden, these people guaranteed have food, have clothing, have electricity, have fresh running water, have a place to live. So that is a much better deal. And it also makes it harder for them to access the substances because they'd have to go an extra step to get money to buy the substances because unfortunately that's how people obtain them with things like money. Is that a fair overview of that?
That's pretty fair. We're not saying in Ontario or Canada, 100% of welfare payments go to drug use,
No.
but it's a significant amount, and any amount is impossible to justify. I mean, what Abby says about welfare instead being used to provide lodging sort of already exists in Ontario where we are. There are subsidized programs where welfare payments can go directly to landlords who will offer subsidized housing, but it's a very poor system and it's becoming untenable.
Mm.
So, whereas, just like the rabbit getting the poison mushroom, to receive money, the power of money without return of service is not allowing someone to fulfill the purpose of human life, which is to be wanted and needed in society. And whereas a significant percentage of money that's freely given in that fashion is not well spent, we would see two streams of sort of replacement, as Abby says, a modified welfare state emerge. One, a work center. And I think this would be a good physical location
Mhm.
and, spread around so it was easily accessed by anybody who would need to access it. And the idea being, let's say you don't have employment,
Mhm.
but you want to get some money. So you would go to the work center and modified duties would be given to you based on your capability. Because a lot of people have trouble holding down a stable job and private companies are not willing to take them in. But if a government funded work center with very, highly skilled employees, good at managing and delegating and organizing people in the vulnerable sector, if someone went in every, a certain time, arrived and was willing to do an honest day's work, as they used to say, it wouldn't have to be extremely difficult. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in communities and in agricultural areas, or depending on the weather. There's lots of things that can be done. But the idea being people who would normally be on welfare wouldn't receive any payment, monetary payment, unless they were able to show some kind of work every day. Again, wouldn't have to be highly difficult, wouldn't have to be highly stressful, just something. And those people would be undamaged enough to be able to be, what we could say, sort of trusted with the power of money. But then you would have another section of the vulnerable sector who weren't even able to do that, weren't even able to show up at the work centers. And so for those people, exactly what Abby said makes sense. I would add the extra step we propose in the book, which is those people who can't even go to the work center need so much support. It's more cost efficient, in our view, to assign them a social worker,
Mhm.
every single one, to manage the tasks of making sure the person is eating properly,
Going to
is,
the dentist and the doctors.
yeah, going to checkups as required, going to benefit from the social benefits that are being offered. The idea that a very vulnerable person is going to be able to pull themselves out by their own good judgment is a very poor concept that's not borne out in reality once you understand damage, and if you actually kind of look around societies and see the growing number of homeless and vulnerable people. So exactly what Abby said makes sense, making sure that those individuals all had, through a personal social worker, food, lodging, shelter, whatever medical and other services they needed, but not money.
Yeah. So, an interesting thing that I learned from working with individuals in the justice system is once they're able to have a job, their life turns around. I've seen it, and so have you, where people they have a job, all of a sudden they're able to function better, they're keeping a schedule, they're happier because they're benefiting society. And even if that job is only a couple hours a day and they're helping to bag groceries at a local store, that is enough. They have a purpose in life. If you're in the vulnerable, very overwhelmed by your damaged population and you're not able to function at your best level, you might not have the capacity to use the money given to you in the best possible way. And I do love the concept of work centers because not only does it help people who might not have the capacity to show up every day. Maybe there are options at the work center if you prove that you are reliable, where you could have a week or a month long contract if that comes up, because work like that exists. You know, temporary workers who cover things like vacation or maternity leave or just holiday extra hours for companies. But it gives people who might struggle to maintain a schedule that somebody else sets for them to have the chance to build skills. But not only that, everyone else in society who is doing as well as they can, but also maybe unemployed or young people trying to get into the workforce, it gives them an opportunity every day to potentially get a job. And it also gives you the flexibility and the freedom that if you have, like, for example, a young child and you can work, but you have to be able to change your schedule based on your child's needs. And you might only the day of know if you could work or not. Hey, now you can work and manage your young child without having to stress too much or to worry about it. And it also just gives the entire community the ability to better access the concept of work and honest, good, useful work. So you can feel really good about that.
So I'll just do a hypothetical just for fun. Let's say Timothy, our friend Timothy, is not doing so good. He's not able to hold down a job. There's been some substance issues. He's maybe taking some anti-craving medication. So he's able to do some things. Let's say he's 30, 33. Let's say he develops schizophrenia later on in his 20s, which is pretty common. So this person needs support.
Mhm.
This is not a person who you can just let drift at sea. And so Timothy says, well, I'd like some money because I'd like to, even though my room and board has been covered and everything like that, I'd like a cell phone, or I'd like to play some video games. I want to buy a gaming system. I want to work for that. Sort of the same way, you know, a person like that is almost like, in some ways, a young child. You might hear that from a 7-year-old. I want to save up money for a bike. But it's not an insult to say that. It's just reality. And again, it's the mark of the rest of society, how good the rest of society is doing, is how well Timothy is able to keep moving up from that stage. So we want Timothy to succeed. Go, Timothy. Okay. So Timothy wants that money, but there's no welfare checks. That's been done away with at this stage of the acts. Great. Work center's down the street. Okay. Timothy trots over to the work center. What do you got for me today? It's okay. Well, you made it in. It's 9 o'clock. You made it in on time. You come in every day from 9 to 4 and you do something that we're going to need you to do. Then at the end of the week, you get whatever, $1,000 or whatever is reasonable. Today and for the rest of the day, we need someone to do crossing guard duty.
Great job.
Or
A local farm is a big one. Seasonal employees to help pick and prune fruits and vegetables. That's super meaningful. It's hard work, but it pays well. It pays really well.
sure,
Yeah.
we need someone to help out at the dog park. There's some trees falling down on this path. What do you want to do, Timothy? These are your options.
Mhm.
Oh, I like outside. It's a nice day. I'm going to clear some branches off the path. Okay, great. Goes off. There's some sort of monitoring to make sure some best efforts are done there. End of the week, great. He's got some money in his account. And it makes sense for him to have money in his account because there's a return of service.
Mhm.
That is important for Timothy's soul and his fundamental happiness.
He showed love by completing necessary work.
Bingo. They say idle hands are the devil's playthings. And although we're trying to steer away from that angle, not so much that, but it's important for Timothy to keep busy because when you're struggling with mental health, addiction, and all these different concurrent issues that are cropping up more and more in this damaged society, work is a good antidote to some of that. And a society that can provide work for a vulnerable person is showing love to that person. Okay, so Timothy's doing great. He's able to work. He otherwise wouldn't have been able to. He wouldn't have been incentivized to, just getting a paycheck showing up every month. That's great. Uh-oh. Timothy is really struggling with the schizophrenia in November. He's very depressed. November depresses me. Timothy too. Oh, he can't work. He can't show up to the work center. He's just not able to make it in until 1 o'clock. Sorry, Timothy, you're late. You can't work today. You got to show up on time. Okay. Right away, personal support worker is assigned. Timothy, what do you need help with? Let's go make sure you get your medication today. Let's go. I'm going to walk with you and we're going to get something to eat. It's going to be delicious.
It's going to stop him from being isolated, which aggravates the effect of damage. Isolation, we've established that.
Mhm.
So someone is showing love to him when he is unable to show love to himself or other people. Plus, just as an aside, I really do love the idea that there's different work every day because I know a lot of people who struggle with mental health nowadays with their jobs. Part of it is because it's monotonous. It's the same thing every day. When you start a new job, it's kind of novel, it's exciting. But after you deal with the same people for so long and the same issues, workplace tensions can rise. So the idea that if part of the reason they're unable to keep permanent employment is because these issues arise, if you're able to sort of choose a different activity every day, even if you cycle through them a few times, it feels fresh, it feels new, it gives you that excitement.
Mhm.
There's a lot of positives to this in helping humans to sort of find ways to show love and earn money in a way that's hopefully less stressful than some of the corporate jobs we see nowadays that people are forced into.
And if you're in the second category that Timothy finds himself in November, I mean, obviously a social worker can't spend 24 hours a day with individuals, but a lot of the social workers I talk to fulfill the role of a friend to Timothy. Like Timothy's really having a tough time. The people that I see, the social workers I see, become a hand for a vulnerable person to grab. Because the thing is, when you look at classrooms, for example, Abby, I'll ask you this. If you have a student who's really struggling, what's a pretty common reflex of the education system to do to help that student?
There's different ones. I think what you're getting at is try to pair them with a buddy in class, someone their own age, who might be able to support and care for them. And if just socially to make them feel more accepted and loved in the classroom by giving them a student who's very sociable and very kind to talk to them, to accept them, and maybe introduce them to their friends, especially if they're new, and also provide supports like social workers or educational assistants, or we have different specialists in things like linguistics and mathematics we can call in to work one on one with the student to improve their skills specifically.
So if it's maybe a child who's not so high needs, it could be a peer.
Mhm.
And if it's higher needs, maybe what do they call that if it's a one-on-one kind of teacher? There's a name for it.
An EA, an educational assistant?
EA,
Yeah.
educational assistant.
Yeah.
So we know to do that for young people, but society seems to have forgotten that logic when it comes to like to do the exact opposite if someone's over the age of 18.
Mm.
Basically, straight arm them away and say, well, you just go into the darkest crevices that a town can offer, and I'm sure that will be good for you. But of course, we know that's not logical. And also, remember at this stage of the acts, because you may be saying, Ian and Abby, it's tremendously expensive what you're proposing, to assign a personal social worker to sort of monitor a caseload of very vulnerable people and make sure that they're getting that positive bond as well as their supports met. But remember, at this point, the new education system and the guardian centers, especially, in our opinion, will have filtered out a lot of people who would become vulnerable. The reality is, in the work that Abby and I have done, you can spot a person who is going to become vulnerable in their adult life a mile away.
Yep.
It's not with scientific accuracy. We're not William telling it over here. But if you are watching this and you have some experience dealing with vulnerable people, or you ask your parents who are a bit older, who have more life experience and have seen trends, Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. In other words, this isn't really novel stuff we're talking about. We can all kind of tell when a person is going to have a rough go at life from a very early point. So, what we're saying is, with the Guardian Center sort of helping take that group of people who you can see coming down the pipe into the vulnerable sector and diverting them, the people who are on the edge, but through the new education system and a more robust elementary system, and the baby license will help too to educate parents to divert those people away from the vulnerable sector. This massive ballooning of homelessness and drug use and major mental health in the late 20s, early 30s that we see naturally must decrease drastically. So it will be feasible to do what we're describing. And in fact, save money because the ones that are left in the vulnerable sector will be less of a imposition or less of a, could say, a human cost, you could say, on healthcare, welfare, and justice system.
We want love to be in every fiber of society. We want to take away damage. And the only way you can get yourself out of a negative spot is to reduce damage because it's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault, but it has to be fixed because if you live your life suffering under the weight of damage, it stops you from being happy. And we don't want that. We're social creatures. We want everyone to succeed. So our proposal, please think about it, is essentially trying to take out the anonymity and the ability for various versions of self harm to be taken out and injecting love, injecting acts of love, receiving love, interactions with other humans, making sure that people have reduced access to things that are harming them and increased access to supports, sort of almost forcing them to use the supports that will help them so they can improve their lives. And then maybe, hopefully, with this system, we'll go from having people who spend their whole lives struggling under a system that's supposed to be a short term solution to people actually using it as a short term solution and very few to no one using it in the long term.
Very true. So, very quickly before we sign off, Abby, what are some of the pillars at play that the work center and the alternate welfare system we talked about offer?
Well, definitely, it should prevent isolation. Taking away a person's power should be replaced with a better reward. Is there another one?
Creating meaningful work.
Oh, yeah, literally.
Staff at the work centers and more PSWs that will need to be trained through the apprenticeship program by a state for this eventuality will create lots of meaningful work. And for the vulnerable, as Abby had a eureka moment about, of course she knew it, but she realized it again, is that the vulnerable people in the vulnerable sector will have meaningful work as well.
There's just so many ways it benefits everybody. But thank you so much for hanging out with us. We'll get into exercise centers in the next video as a little sneak peek, which I really hope come into effect because it would be awesome.
Awesome. You heard it here first, folks. So coming at you from Dance with Damage. Thanks for tuning in.
Have a great day.